What's up, Guardians? We're doing a new video today. Today we're going to be breaking down the director's cuts from Luke Smith. In the past week, Luke Smith has done 3 different director's cuts, which are essentially him writing about the game, Destiny 2, obviously, and sharing his different thoughts. And I'm going to break down each director's cut into a separate video and try and break down the director's cut into a short and condensed version as possible, so that you can come here for the information if you ever forget something, or if you just want to kind of remind yourself what Luke Smith wrote about when he wanted to talk about his baby, his game, essentially, the game he's trying to build and stuff. So the game Bungie's trying to build. So let's get right into this. So the first part of Director's Cut really went over Season of the Drifter and Season of Opulence, and talked about a number of different aspects of the game, and he broke them down into short little titles. So I'm going to go over each one of those with you. So the first one was titled "We Have a Powerful Source Problem," and the main thing that he highlighted in here is that Destiny continues to grow and grow and grow, and he talks about this later in another director's cut, but here he's really focusing on the fact that there's just, because Destiny is growing and more activities are being added to the playlist and stuff, we just have too many ways to earn powerful gear and powerful drops, and our characters are leveling really fast compared to the way they have been in previous seasons and in previous iterations of Destiny, and how that's becoming, powerful sources and things like that are becoming something that are becoming either a checklist or mundane, or they become absolutely pointless like 2 weeks into the new season. The next section focuses on Season of the Drifter. There's a part 1 and part 2. In part 1, he highlights Gambit and Gambit Prime, and how going forward, both Bungie and the people, and obviously the players, are going to have to determine which vision of Gambit we want moving forward into future content releases, because having them both clashes with each other, and it makes it very difficult on the team to create a well-developed game mode, because you have to balance for both games, essentially. 2 games that, although they made them somewhat similar in the end goal, they're very different as you play them out. He did say also that Bungie had realized that focusing a whole season on one activity in Destiny was not a great idea, and that it felt too specialized. In part 2, he specifically talks about the Reckoning, and in part 2 he breaks down that characters have become too powerful in Destiny 2, and specifically he mentions the way Phoenix Protocol works in Destiny 2 right now is it gives Warlocks basically infinite wells, and that going into the Reckoning development and design, the Bungie team knew, hey, we have to develop the game for these really powerful exotics and for these really powerful characters. And ultimately what happens at the end is they break a lot of their guidelines for when they're building activities. One example of this that he mentions is they don't want enemies to ever spawn behind you, and if they do ever spawn behind you, they want the player to, they want to A, communicate that to the player in a very obvious way, and B, they want to give the player plenty of space to move around so that they can, get to some sort of cover to regen their shield and reload their guns and stuff like that. But that kind of thing doesn't happen, obviously, in the Reckoning, and it's because our characters are too powerful that it breaks these mechanics. The next section touches on difficulty and sandbox nerfs, as well as the player power. So right now, activities are designed similar to the Reckoning. Activities are designed with these powerful items in mind. For example, Whisper of the Worm, which broke the ammo economy, and Phoenix Protocol, which constantly gave people wells. When the game is designed with those items in mind, what happens is when players don't use those items, for example in the Reckoning, if they don't match with a Warlock, then the activity becomes extremely difficult for those players. So Luke talks about how there's going to be a series of buffs and nerfs in order to push the player into a certain power level so that activities still feel challenging and still feel rewarding when completed. The next section quickly goes over the Pursuits tab and how Bungie shipped basically what they felt was an incomplete product in the Pursuits tab, and how it's being revamped to have both a quest section and a bounty section moving forward. So overall, your Pursuits tab is going to be much cleaner. And if you're on PC, you're going to be able to have a hotkey so that you can open your Pursuits tab immediately. All of this is great news. The next section talks about the evolving Eververse. So there's going to be more changes to Eververse. If you don't already know some of those changes, I'll highlight them really quickly here because we're trying to keep this short. Some of the Eververse changes include being able to, you won't earn Bright Dust from deleting items, but when you want to get an item from your collection, it'll only cost you Legendary Shards and Glimmer. So moving forward, before Shadowkeep launches, you want to delete all your Eververse items so that you have as much Bright Dust as possible. And then when Shadowkeep comes around, you'll be able to earn Bright Dust through bounties. And when you want to get a Eververse item from your collection, you'll be able to do it without spending Bright Dust. Also, another change that he talked about in this post is that Eververse A will be accessible from orbit, so you won't have to go to the tower. And also, if you earn parts of like a gear set, for example, in the Eververse store, the cost for the silver to buy that gear set will go down. So the more you earn by playing the game, the less you'll have to spend with money if you choose to spend money on this money in the Eververse store. Personally, I hate loot boxes and I don't purchase those, and the only things I've bought are like Outbreak Prime skin, Whisper skin, and a Last Word skin in the Eververse store, but I knew what I was getting when I bought it. So he also mentions in this part, which was really cool, is that the Whisper of the Worm ornaments that were sold helped fund the 0 hour mission and the rewards, and it helped fund the entire construction of that activity. So that's something to keep in mind when you are spending your money at Eververse, is you are actually putting money into development of the game. The last two sections touch on the Menagerie and how great an activity it is, and I actually want to read a quote from Luke Smith's director's cut showing what he kind of thinks of the Menagerie and what Bungie thinks. Quote, "We love the Menagerie. It's a great middle spot on a 6-player activity pyramid with raids sitting at the top. Escalation Protocol is a great base." So what he talks about in this is how activities are built off of one another, and how the Menagerie was a culmination of how raids are built, as well as how something as simple as Escalation Protocol was built, and how it ended up becoming a really good activity where players were always making progress and always earning loot at the end, and they weren't really failing compared to something like the Reckoning, which is sometimes really frustrating because of the match-made elements. The last section talks about all the seasons kind of as a whole, and how Bungie kind of develops their activities, and how sometimes that leads to one activity not being as great as another. So for example, the Black Armory DLC had a really clear path to earning your weapons and things like that, and a really clear gameplay loop of replaying the forges over and over again to earn your weapons. In this case, in the case of the Reckoning, there really was no clear path to earning the weapons, and that ultimately really hurt the activity because players love chasing weapons. And overall, one of his suggestions, if he went back in time, was that the Gambit Prime armor should have dropped in Gambit Prime, and then weapons should have been a way to, or Reckoning should have been a way to give you the player all of the weapons in a Menagerie kind of style. So it's very important to understand that Bungie develops these activities at the same time, which can lead to why one activity does really well, like the Menagerie, a great activity in many people's opinion, versus the Reckoning, something that's really daunting, very difficult, very tedious, and not very rewarding. So yeah, that's it for the first part, part one of the director's cut. I agree with a lot of what Luke Smith's saying. I don't think the Reckoning is a very good activity, although it's being fixed September 3rd, hopefully. I do think Menagerie was a great activity. I think Black Armory is a great DLC, and I also think player power is getting out of hand, and we're going to end up talking about that in a later part of director's cut. So I hope you guys stick around, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.